STEPSTONE Inc. has been manufacturing innovative handmade precast concrete products for over 4 decades. We introduced narrow modular pavers 11 years ago. Projects across the country chose the elegant linear style that only narrow modular pavers by STEPSTONE could deliver. We are now making narrow modular pavers available to the homeowner through our dealer network. We want to make sure that everyone can have a successful installation, and we'd like to show you how to do that. A successful patio begins with a good plan. First, check your local building codes to see if any permits are required. Next, draw a plan, even if it's just a single 8.5 by 11 page, to find the dimensions of the new patio and outline how it will relate with existing elements in your yard. You'll want to consider how close you want to be to a planter or existing deck, or maybe there are irrigation lines you'll want to avoid. When making a plan, remember, narrow modular pavers come in 3 lengths: 9, 18, or 24 inches. We encourage you to design a patio that uses full sizes. Take a look at the list of recommended tools. The first construction step is excavating out an area for your new patio. You've got to provide an area to backfill with rock for good drainage and a stable setting for your pavers. Most residential patios of 200 square feet or less need only excavate down about 6.5 inches. Even at 6.5 inches, a 100 square foot area will result in a good sized pile of dirt. If you're going to do this yourself, you might want to call your local garbage company and rent a small roll-off container where you can throw the dirt out, or make sure you have some friends lined up who need dirt for their potting soil. Excavate an area that extends about 6 inches past your finished patio dimensions. This will make it easy for you to install your perimeter containment, a step we'll show you later. When checking the depth of your excavation, remember, we're trying to maintain the existing grade. We set 2 diagonal string lines from one side of our hole to the other. Measure along the line to see if you've met your target depth. Add or subtract dirt as necessary to get this sub-base layer as level as possible. The next step, we're going to place a weed barrier or landscape fabric on top of the dirt. The weed barrier prevents root growth and minimizes plant material coming up through the bottom of your paving surface. It's porous fabric, so it allows for water to percolate through. Overlap each layer of the weed block so you can help ensure complete coverage. Cover the weed block with rock and then compact that rock. In our example where we've excavated down 6.5 inches, you will add approximately 2 inches of compacted rock. With the rock, you want to make sure that you leave about 4.5 inches worth of space above the rock layer for your compacted sand and pavers to later fill. How deep your rock goes depends on your installation. For pedestrian patios like the one we're making in the back of these houses, you only need a couple inches of rock. This is not meant to be a guide for driveways. If you're going to build a driveway, we recommend you consult with a qualified architect or engineer. Measure a rough elevation before you compact the rock to avoid putting in too much rock. Place the diagonal strings across from one corner to the other and see how high you are right now. To help when using the vibrating compactor to compact the rock and sand, we're going to lay down a sheet of inexpensive plywood and run the compactor on top of the plywood. We found that folks who haven't used a heavy sled before tend to gouge the rock or sand layer at every turn. The plywood enables the average homeowner a chance to compact a consistent rock or sand layer. To check our own measuring, we're going to do a first compaction of the rock and then measure again. You may repeat the compaction and measuring steps a couple of times until you get it right. This is a handheld tamper that is useful sometimes in the corner if you can't get to places. Simply lift up and drop the tamp down to allow its weight to press and compact the rock. One of the tests that you can see is that as you walk on the gravel surface after it's been compacted, if your footprints don't gouge it, that means you are moving towards necessary compaction. The next step is to place a 1-inch thick layer of uncompacted sand on top of the compacted rock. We're going to use steel conduit as our guides for the elevation of that layer of sand. We call the conduit our screed rails. The outside dimension of 3/4 inch rigid electrical conduit is just about 1 inch. Lay the conduit pieces on top of the rock and cover them with sand. Using a 2x4, pull along the top of the conduit to reveal a consistent 1-inch layer of sand. The distance between the conduit should only be as wide as you can comfortably pull the screed filled with sand. Typically, we put about 40 inches between the screed rails. Carefully remove the conduit and backfill the channels left behind with sand. We recommend you compact the sand prior to installing the narrow modular pavers. Use the plywood to help you compact the sand as you did with the rock. Check the elevation of the sand layer by placing diagonal string lines and measuring as you did with the subbase and rock layers. Next, we need to establish a square corner for our patio. Some installations will already have 2 square sides established. In this case, the remaining slab patio establishes 2 square sides. To establish a square corner in open dirt, as we're doing in our second patio, it's best to have 3 people to help manipulate 2 string lines to form a right angle. Place a stake outside your installation area at a point that is within roughly 6 inches of where you want the finished patio to start. Attach a second line to that corner spike and pull it perpendicular to your first line. Measure and mark on one line 3 feet from your corner spike. On the other line, measure and mark 4 feet from your corner spike. Now is when you need a couple of buddies to help. On an angle, measure the distance between the 3 and 4 foot marks. The length of the line connecting those 2 marks must be 5 feet. Once you've found this 3, 4, 5 triangle, set your spikes and secure your lines. These 2 lines that form your square corner we'll call your outside lines. We're going to set our first paver guidelines measuring from the outside lines. From one outside line, measure in to the point where you want to place one side of the first paver. It will help to place a paver in that spot. From the other outside line, measure in to the other side of the paver and move the paver to the correct spot. Your first paver is in place and you can build a square patio from there. To stagger the joints, we started with an 18-inch paver. The next row that stacks against this first row will start with a 9-inch paver. When you're setting and adjusting the pavers, avoid tilting and picking them up from one end or the other. As best you can, pick them straight up. We supply T-spacers for the bottom of the pavers during installation. As we start the next row, we put a spacer in between the pavers. It allows us to maintain a consistent joint and helps lock the paver in before the joint sand is placed. Take the long direction of the spacer and put it in the long direction of the paver. The short end of the spacer, put in the short direction. Narrow modular pavers are handmade and they will vary slightly in length. It's important to note that even with the spacers, you cannot butt the pavers together and form consistent end joints. Building consistent end joints will be made possible by installing string lines as guides at each end joint. Remember to measure from your outside line or existing square edge when setting the joint guidelines. Sometimes when they are loose laid, the pavers will be a little bit uneven from one end to the end of the other one right next to it. Gently tapping the pavers with a rubber mallet can help guarantee correct alignment. You may see slight movement between one joint line to the next. It is important to use the string line as your guide to open or close the joint spacing as necessary to maintain roughly consistent joint lines. There will be slight differences in the joint spacing, but later compaction of the pavers and filling the joints with sand will help minimize the visual impact of those differences. What you really want to do is maintain your string line here and focus on that as your guide for the joints. If it opens up just a little bit more or less, don't worry about it at this point. Just stay true to your string line. Notice how we build up and over from one corner. Next, we're going to nail down the perimeter containment to block the sand from migrating out. We want our perimeter containment to be in direct contact with our rock base. The edging does not go all the way up to the top of the paver. It's going to get buried by dirt later on. The important thing is that it blocks the joint between the sand layer and the bottom of the paver. At this point, you can cover the containment edge with dirt. Don't compact it yet, just get it loosely buried and that will make it easier to compact the pavers. With the perimeter containment in place, compact the pavers into the sand bed. Notice that they run the compactor across the short or 3-inch dimension of the pavers. The next step is the initial sweeping of the joint sand. Please note, it's better if you dry the sand out because it flows easier when it's dry. Throw sand on top of the pavers and sweep it into every joint. In this initial sweeping and compacting, we expect to fill 3 inches of the joint. We're going to do another pass later with a polymeric joint sand to lock it in at the top. Be sure to use the plywood or some other material to protect the surface of the pavers from scratching caused by the compactor. Be careful to make your passes with the compactor over the short direction of the pavers. You see here that they're passing over the 3-inch dimension of the pavers, not the 18-inch length. This sand is the polymeric joint sand, which is the top layer of sand. Polymeric sand has an acrylic mixture that is activated with water, and you can see how powdery and fine it is. Normally, you'll fill about the last inch to inch and a half of your paver joint depth with the polymeric sand. Fill the joints up to about 1/8 of an inch below the top of the paver. Take your time to sweep the dust from the polymeric sand completely off the top of the pavers. Some polymeric sand manufacturers recommend you gently blow the dust off the pavers with a leaf blower. The next step is to mist water across the entire patio to activate the polymeric sand. Cover all joints with water, but don't create pools of standing water within the joints. All that's left is to clean up your tools and admire your work. A patio made from narrow modular pavers will be a unique addition to any backyard. Its long-term durability and distinctive appearance will make your outdoor living better.